Hello, I'm David Schuman.
And I'm Yanovsky, better known in this office as Magoo.
Welcome to the Shu and Magoo mini show, where we're going to talk about the hottest sport topics out there, especially related to the topics of football. Here's why the BCS is probably not going to work, because if each one of those guys go undefeated, I mean, how do you leave one of the four of them out in the national championship game? Obviously, what's going to happen? You're going to have Oregon versus Auburn. Okay, if they completely win out, which is not a given. Auburn still has to play Alabama, and they'll still have to play in the SEC championship game. And Oregon probably has a little bit easier road from that standpoint. TCU, Boise State, they should continue to win out without a problem.
Strength of schedule.
So just because of strength of schedule. So now you get four teams that are undefeated. Auburn and Oregon are outstanding. Boise State and TCU get left out. Now, again, you feel like, never know. Now, how about if you had, in your bracket, if you have your 1 seed is Oregon, and your 4 seed plays Boise State, and then your 2 seed is Auburn, and they play TCU, and then you go a +2 at the end of the season, and you have those 4 teams playing for the national championship. Now you'll know. Right. Now you'll know who is the best 4 teams throughout the country, and then you'll also know who are the best players. So, Michael James, who's a Heisman candidate, Kellen Moore is a Heisman candidate, Andy Dalton, who's a Heisman candidate, Cam Newton is obviously the leader in the Heisman race right now. You'll be able to find out who's the best guy in that situation. We might never find out.
See, you know what? That's a good idea. I half agree with you. Now, let's say there's teams right outside the top 4 that has a loss. You know, and you could say, oh, well, Boise State didn't lose because 9 of their games came against the weak teams. Now, I think the top 4 is somewhat of a good idea, but I believe you need to expand it. Now, who is to say that number 9 can't beat number 2? I mean, we've seen the number 1 teams in the country lose to teams they were supposed to blow out. I mean, Alabama had a loss. I don't remember who was against.
They've got 2 now.
Yeah, they've got 2. Their first loss was against a team that we're not supposed to lose to. Now,
South Carolina.
South Carolina. You look at the playoff situation in any other sports. I mean, in the NBA, the number 1 seed, you've had them lose to the 8 seed. Now, that team, might not have been as good on paper, might not have the exact same record, but they came in there and they proved that, yes,
Absolutely.
we could beat these guys. Now, I think you need to have either 8 teams or 16 teams, because there's teams right outside of that top 4 that could,
let's look at the FCS. Let's look at the FCS and what they have. The old 1AA, where I played at UConn, well, back when UConn was 1AA. You made the playoffs, 16 teams get in. There's nothing more exciting than the playoff. You don't have to look any further. Football is far better than NCAA football is far better than NCAA basketball throughout the course of the season, with the exception of one thing. And what is that?
That's the NCAA tournament.
The NCAA tournament.
1 game, anything goes.
One thing, anything can happen.
So you now agree with me that we should extend it to 16 teams?
I think the initial first step, because you know how the BCS is going to be, people aren't going to want to part with bowl games. But why not? Why not have your first round game in the Orange Bowl? Okay, and your second round game is in the Fiesta Bowl, and so each one of the bowls still get involved, right? But you have that championship NCAA tournament feel, just like you do at 1AA, Division II, and Division III, and just like you have in basketball, which makes March Madness the most exciting thing in sports. Absolutely. Even though how many times you watch the regular season? Of course, this is what their argument is, right? Their argument would be, well, the regular season wouldn't matter. Okay, regular season wouldn't matter. Well, yes, it does matter, because unlike in basketball where you're taking 64 teams, if you're taking 16 or you're taking 8 teams, it's very difficult to get into that top 16, top 8, so every game does matter. And where you get ranked and seeded in the championship in the end does matter. If you're the number 1 seed or the number 8 seed, that's a big difference between what type of team you play. So every single game, I think it's kind of a bogus argument. The BCS has to go to, I think initially they're going to have to go to a +2 or we would call this a +1, obviously, game, and then eventually go to some mini tournament style, whether it's 8 or 16 teams, to be able to find out who is the best team in the country. Because for me, I'll tell you, that empty feeling of who the 3rd team was, a Boise State getting left out, and those coaches, they always say the right things, meaning, hey, if I feel like we deserve to play, then I'll say it. And not complain. That's just because, you know what, them going and complaining ain't going to make a difference, or it's not going to make a difference.
And it isn't. You know, you have other teams you look outside. Guys like Utah's another team that people say, okay, well, you know, they're doing great this year, but who have they played?
Right.
Just because you haven't played a great team doesn't mean you can't beat a good team, as I alluded to earlier, with Boise State winning the bowl game and winning every game in the last 2 years, besides having a phenomenal home field advantage. Now, if we had this playoff system, you know, and they were able to work something out where you legitimately had the 16 best teams in the country, you know, and it wasn't done by the BCS, it was done by some other type of poll. I mean, look, they have all these different things. There's USA Today, there's ESPN, there's the coaches, there's the AP. You know, there'll be a way for them to somehow collectively figure out the top 16 teams. You know, not only would it benefit the NCAA financially, it would be great for the fans. You know, there'd be a lot of games on TV. And I mean, you know, with all due respect to these small schools, people aren't interested in you know, the Turkey Bowl or the Soup Bowl. I mean, there are too many.
But money is involved in it.
There are too many bowl games to the point where it doesn't mean anything. You know, I would love to see one true national champion crowned where it means something. Because there's so many times, and I'll leave it at this. I remember a number of years ago, Nebraska got absolutely slaughtered by Colorado in the final week of the regular season. Slaughtered. Nebraska plays in the national championship. Colorado plays in a different game. After slaughtering Nebraska. Nebraska loses the national championship. Now people would say, oh, for that big win, what if Colorado was in that game?
Good point.